I'm so impressed you all came back. There might be 10 people. I don't know what's harder, speaking for 4 hours or sitting for 4 hours. And I might rather be in this spot, but thank you so much. We just have 2 books left. We have Cherish, and I've been asked about this one, When to Walk Away, Finding Freedom from Toxic People. This was revolutionary for me. I'm a people pleaser my whole life. But if I want to cherish my wife and love my kids and fulfill the ministry that God has given me, I needed to become aware, and I share the story of how that happened in there, of toxic people that Satan can often send to distract you from your real relationships. Have you ever been with your kids or your spouse at night and you realize you're not paying attention to them because this toxic person is just kind of haunting your thoughts? Or you see on your phone somebody calls you and your blood pressure just spikes just seeing their name? And you think as a Christian, your job is to still be there and still try to be nice to them. What if it's not? What if for you to love and cherish the people God has called you to love and cherish, you need to walk away? It was a life-changing experience for me when a friend of mine, who's been a marriage and family therapist, who said, Gary, I want you to go to the book of Luke and count how many times Jesus walked away from somebody or let somebody walk away from him. And I went through all 4 Gospels. It became the appendix for this book. And I saw sometimes a necessary strategy that it just blew me away and caught me by surprise. So that's what that book is about for that. Let's pray for this last session. Lord, thank you just for the willingness of these people to be here. You've given us such a beautiful day, and I just pray for your divine energy. Father, they're here away from families or hobbies or what else they might be doing, and I just pray you would make it worth your time, that this session be practical and helpful and instructive. In Jesus' name, amen. This session is the art and practice of cherishing your spouse, because I want you to know I live in the real world. I'm not asking you to cherish the 4th member of the Trinity. That person doesn't exist. You're cherishing a real person with real issues, according to James 3:2, that stumbles in many ways. I was struck by the story of a singer. She was fairly successful. She performed. She's a Christian. And she was getting older, and she's falling in love with a guy. She'd had a tough background. There was abuse in her background, sexual abuse. And then she responded, as a number of women do, with eating disorders and whatnot. And she was kind of getting it somewhat under wraps. And then she fell in love with a guy, and they were going to get married. And she realized that her career wasn't very good for a woman who was going to be married and have kids. So she took on another job just when she got married. And the way she had dealt with the sexual abuse is just not to think about sex at all. And she'd shared issues of her past with her future husband. Then they got married. And suddenly she had to think about sex. She's married. They're having it. And then to make matters worse, she changed jobs. She felt competent. She knew how to mesmerize an audience. She knew how to perform. She'd been doing it successfully. And now she was in a job where she didn't feel quite so competent. And that created all of these anxieties. And now it was financially tighter. She was making considerably less than she had as a performer. And now she's having to be sexually active, where she had just repressed her sexuality. All of this was like this perfect storm for her. And one evening, her husband was getting a little frisky, and she thought, man, it's been a while. We'll probably need to do it. So she said to her husband, look, just give me a few minutes. I need to go to the bathroom. But she didn't go to the bathroom. She went to the kitchen. She opened up the refrigerator door, and if it was edible, she's putting it in her mouth. She found a box of takeout Chinese food, and as she's putting noodles in her face, with literally noodles hanging out of her mouth, she heard a sound behind her. And she turned, and it was her new husband. I can't even describe the shame and just the guilt and the embarrassment. I mean, he had heard her talk about it, and now he was seeing it. And this man did something so wonderfully cherishing and refreshing. He smiled. He didn't shame her. He smiled. He pulled out a drawer. He got 2 forks. He said, honey, you don't have to do this alone anymore. We're married. And the way that he just said, I know you have a past. I know you have issues, but let me be a part of it. It's so wonderfully refreshing, such a cherishing thing to do. Now, I know there are limitations I'm not suggesting you engage in, I don't know, robbing a bank or something that would be an hour. But in a situation like this where he just said, I'm not running from you. I'm here with you. We're going to go through this together. Your spouse may not have abuse issues or eating disorder issues or porn issues or anger. I don't know what they could be, but they have issues. That's what I love about this church. It was kind of founded on the testimony of Jim and the staff that they bring in, that this is real life. It's not ideal life. And so in real life, how do we learn to cherish imperfect spouses? I want to give you 5 things to do that as we close this afternoon. The first thing, if you want your spouse to feel cherished, you have to learn how to catch bids. How to catch bids. A bid is any play that your spouse makes for your attention. It could be reading the paper. It could be, hey, honey, you see that bird outside there? It could just be trying to get their attention. At that moment, you're creating a cherishing marriage or a cold marriage. I've mentioned Dr. John Gottman. He studied couples, and he thinks this is one of the most important things that married couples can do. He divides marriages into marriage masters and marriage disasters. Marriage disasters catch about 33% of the bids. Marriage masters catch about 87% of the time. So he said basically the health of your marriage can be seen in really this statistic alone. When your spouse is making a bid for your attention, 9 times out of 10 you catch it, you got a great marriage. 3 times out of 10, you're very likely headed toward divorce. If you don't understand the importance of catching bids, anything you do can become destructive to your marriage, even going to church. I was sitting in a church about this big one time behind a young couple. The husband was next to a buddy of his. The pastor was a dynamic speaker. He was funny. He was engaging. He brought the stuff. And he opens up with a story that kind of everybody laughed, and the wife looks at her husband, but he looks left at his buddy instead of at his wife. And they nod and they laugh. 2 guys, yeah, that was funny. And then the pastor said something a little bit that made everybody go, oh, yeah. So the wife looks to her husband, and he looks toward his buddy again, and they knock knuckles. And I could see her getting more and more frustrated. Frustration turned to anger until at the end of the sermon, she is stony-faced ahead. I can tell she's steaming. And I've worked with enough of these couples to almost predict the conversation on the way home. She's going to be silent. He's going to, oh, honey, is something wrong? And she's going to be so angry that he doesn't know what's wrong. And he might tell her, or she might tell him, he said, well, don't you want me to have a friend? Yeah, but she wants you to have friends, but she wants to be your first look. She's making these bids. Are we in this church service together? Are we doing this together? And when you keep ignoring her, she doesn't feel cherished. She feels cut out. And when I realized that dynamic, guys, this is so important for us with our wives, that just paying attention to my wife is what's going to make her feel cherished. And wives, I've seen wives ignore their husbands as well with this. If I cherish my spouse, I'm catching their bids. Which means men, and again, I don't mean to make this sexist. It's just sort of the setup in my own marriage. But I hear guys say this more often. When the wives are talking to them and the husband says, honey, just give me the Reader's Digest version. Here's how that sounds to the wife. I really don't want to hear what you have to say. But I'm loving you, so I have to. So please make it as painless as possible. All right? Now, that might be love, but it's not cherishing. She doesn't feel cherished. And I say this because, look, I'm married to the extrovert. I'm an introvert. And my friends know this. My best friend called our house one time when our kids were still at home. My daughter answered, and Rob said, hey, Al, is your dad there? She goes, no, but my mom is. And Rob goes, I don't have that kind of time. And he hung up, and that was it. So maybe I'm more conscious of this, but here's the thing, guys. If we want our wives to feel cherished, we have to make time. And I found just sometimes asking a couple questions is like verbally affirming them and cheering. Well, tell me more. Not only do I want you just to get this over, I want to know more. Give me some of the backstory. A friend of mine, Donnie, who has a great cherishing marriage with his wife, Jacqueline, told me the key. He said his teacher taught him as he's growing up that you listen with your eyes as much as your ears. See, I thought early on in my marriage, my wife could be talking to me, I could be on my phone, I'm still listening, but that doesn't make her feel cherished. When I use my eyes and I look at her, she knows I'm listening, she knows she cares. And that's a powerful element of cherishing. Donnie also told me about how he works with his wife, Jacqueline, and they have a small business, and he was making a bid right before, it was due at 6 p.m. It's a $200,000 bid, which is a pretty good bid for their business. His wife had already finished, so she'd packed everything up. She's looking through Facebook, and she came across something that a Facebook friend, not a real friend, but a Facebook friend had. And so she's telling him about it. And I love Donnie's attitude. He said, Gary, compared to a $200,000 bid, I didn't give 2 cents what this friend was doing. I really didn't care. But compared to my wife feeling cherished, the $200,000 bid didn't matter. Which teaches us it's not just what our spouse is saying, it's who is saying it. If I want to use attention to cherish my wife, I'm looking at that. And it's something we just have to learn. I can't make these things up. When I was literally writing this chapter in Cherish, my wife and I were at a hotel that had suites. So I'm up earlier than hers. I usually am. I'm working on it. I got to wake her up. And I go in. I mentioned that she's very holistic and organic and all of those things natural. She told me, some of you that will know this, when she went to Pilgrim's Market, she's like, okay, we're moving here. All right? She would move here. I don't know what Pilgrim, must be a healthy store. Because she said, that's all I need to know. I would move here for Pilgrim's Market. So that's her. That's the kind of stuff she reads. And so I wake her up, and she's telling me about her dreams, like she likes to do in the morning. That's what she's thinking about. And then she noticed I never share dreams. She goes, you never mention your dreams. I go, yeah. Do you not remember them? I said, almost never. She said, well, if you remember them, are they good or they're bad? Well, if I remember them, they're always bad. She goes, yeah, I read in one of my journals that means you're lacking vitamin B6. Okay, I did what a lot of you just did. You laughed. I hope my wife didn't hear that. I saw that look on her face. And here's what I love, guys, about Gottman's research. That told me, okay, I missed that bid. I got to catch the next 9. If my wife is going to feel cherished at the end of the day, I've got to catch that bid. Because if I wanted her to feel cherished, I'd say, even though it sounds specious to me, like, I don't know. I don't, but I'm not a doctor. I don't know either way. But I can say, well, how do I get more vitamin B6 in my diet? It's not really about health for me at that point. I want to have a cherishing marriage. I want my wife to know if it's important enough for her to say it, it's important enough for me to pay attention. This is a very practical thing. Do you want your spouse to feel cherished? Learn to catch the bids. The second one that's so helpful is that if you cherish something, you'll protect it. Guys that cherish their cars put on those very annoying car covers. You know that? It's a really nice car, which makes every one of us wants to kind of dent it. I never have, but there's just something in human nature, that somebody takes that. That's terrible to say. So don't do that. But if you cherish something, you want to protect it. If you cherish your spouse, you want to protect your spouse. I was working with a couple over a number of weeks. I'll call them Carlos and Rosa. That's not their real name. And they showed up late at the church. And I opened up the door, and Carlos said, Garrett, I'm sorry we're late. I was here 5 minutes early. Rosa just got here. Rosa looks at him and says, well, thanks for throwing me under the bus. And this had come up a couple times, so I said, well, let's deal with the root issue. I said, Carlos, you know why you threw her under the bus? And he said, why? I said, because you cared more what I think about you than what Rosa thinks about you. I go, and here's why that's so stupid. I'm not going to be thinking about you 2 hours from now. 10 years from now, I might not even remember your name. You might not remember mine. But you're going home with Rosa. She knows she's the reason you're late. And if you can protect her like that instead of throwing her under the bus, she's going to feel defended, and that's going to make her feel protected. Why do you care what I think of you? You can't please everybody. She should be your first concern. Now, Rosa was loving this until I said, now, Rosa, you know how you felt when Carlos threw you under the bus? She goes, yes. Well, that's exactly how he feels every time you make him late. We've talked about his dad. It's visceral to him. To make him late goes against everything he believes in. So when you leave a little bit late, thinking you're going to get your hair done or get that chore done on the way or whatnot, you're not protecting him. You're thinking of yourself. I want you to cherish each other. You've got to protect each other. That's the attitude you have to have. That's what creates a marriage that is just so rich and fulfilling. We go back to 1981. President Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan, everybody knew, because it's so, in Washington, D.C., everybody's attacking everybody, and they had this protective marriage. And you might remember in September, I believe, if it's that year, something like that. It's the first year of Reagan's term. He's walking out of the Washington Hilton Hotel, and a would-be assassin started to shoot up the whole thing. At first, they didn't know that Reagan was hit, but a bullet went in his left side as they got him in the car. And they didn't know it till they got to the hospital. The would-be assassin, had used what are called devastator bullets. They're designed to explode on impact and create maximum damage. So it went into the side. It wasn't until they opened him up that they realized how bad it was. And our nation didn't know. We almost lost him as president. We came this close. It was touch and go for many hours. And Nancy had her closest circle of friends that came, their pastor and his wife from California. Frank Sinatra and his wife came out. Billy Graham and his wife was there. And then there was a journalist who recounted this story. They were with her all day. And Nancy went from worried to feeling guilty. And she kept blaming herself. And one of us, how can you blame yourself? You had nothing to do with it. She goes, well, I was going to go with him this morning. I said, Ronnie, I'll go with you. He said, no, honey, it's not a big deal. It's going to be short. You just stay here and rest, and I'll be back in a little bit. She goes, and whenever I'm with him, I'm always at his left side. If you remember how big Nancy Reagan wasn't, a devastator bullet in her left side, and she wouldn't have been here. But she said, it should have been me. I should have been there to protect my husband. Why could they be so close amidst that poisonous, toxic stew of D.C.? They protected each other. Now, for most of us, it's not protecting our spouse from an assassin, but there's a lot of social protection we can do. When Lisa and I first moved to Houston, she would invite people over to eat, to get to know them, and I had to kind of warn them about what we were going to eat because she cooks pretty healthy. She does. I mean, you got to get, farm-raised, local, non-GMO. There's like 10 words it has to be. If they're animals, they have to be happy deaths, right? It's not enough to have you laugh. I'm serious. It really matters to her that they have certified happy deaths. And so I just called him. I said, hey, I just want you to know we've got this lamb. It's from a local farm, all of that. And he said, and it surprised, he goes, oh, Gary, I'm so sorry. That's just the one thing I can't eat. I don't want to offend Lisa. I go, that's no big deal. We've got happy chickens that had happy deaths. We'll get one of them, and we'll have that. It just surprised me because he's a hunter, and eventually he just didn't seem to me like the kind of guy that would not like lamb. And then I was with him 2 years later at a restaurant, and he ordered lamb. And I realized his wife is a picky eater. And they were just getting to know Lisa, and he didn't want Lisa to think ill of his wife. So what did he do? I can't eat lamb. And my respect for him is still high today. I go, that is a graduate school cherishing move. Think ill of me, not of my wife. Another guy, he's like the opposite of me. He doesn't care what anybody thinks about him. He's so gregarious. He's a lot of fun to be around. And his wife loves vegetables, but she's got a real problem with gas and flatulence. I mean, she's tried the charcoal pills. She's tried everything. If you're around him, you have a nose and ears, you kind of know. And it's embarrassing for his wife, and so he's just decided he takes that on. So whenever they're in a group, he goes, my bad, everybody. I hope you enjoy that burrito as much as I did for lunch. And all of their friends, they haven't told anyone, all of their friends think he has a real problem. He doesn't. It's his wife. But guys, here's what she told me, because we get invited in these private. She just said, Gary, you have no idea what a woman will do to cherish a man in private when he protects her in public. Men and women, let's make our spouse feel protected. Marriage tells you a lot of things about each other. That's sacred. Let's protect our spouse. Let's make them feel cherished, that everything we know is going to be protected. So you catch the bids, you protect your spouse. The third practical thing we do, you have to win the mind games. You have to win the mind games. I've referred to this several times. We all stumble in how many ways? Many ways. So you're married to somebody who isn't always going to be worthy of being cherished, and you can keep fretting about how they don't deserve to be cherished and how they stumble. And if that's the case, you will not be able to cherish your spouse. You've got to win the mind games. A couple that had been married just 3 months had a big walk-in closet, and they were getting dressed at the same time. And the wife took a blouse off a hanger, and she put it up there, and she's about to put it on, and her husband looks at her, and she could tell he was just seething. He said, I know you're doing that just to bug me. She's, what am I doing? Putting that naked hanger up there with the other clothes? First, she had never heard the phrase naked hanger. She had no idea what he was even talking about. And he explained to her that once you take a piece of clothing off a hanger, it becomes a naked hanger. And it's embarrassed to be with the clothes hangers. And so you put them all together, and she looked in his corner, on the right-hand corner, there was this little nudist colony of hangers, all happily naked together, none of them embarrassed. She was not doing anything to bug him. It was just, she didn't even know it was a thing, and she was happy to change. And that's where, in the mind games, there are going to be things that you legitimately disagree about. But make sure it's a legitimate thing, all right? Give your spouse the benefit of the doubt here. Philippians 4:8 is so great when you apply it to marriage. You've heard it so many times. So let me just list it instead of reading it. What is the first thing you're supposed to think about? Whatever is true. Is my spouse really trying to bug me? Or is this just me? Do I need to bring it up? And then here's what I'm commanded to think about. If it's noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy, which means I'm commanded not to think about something that's not on this list. I've got to win the mind games. I did a whole sermon on this called Think About What You Think About. So often we let our minds drive us. We got to take control of our minds. We got to say, stop thinking about that. Start thinking about what is excellent and praiseworthy. I've referred to this obliquely, but let me just put it head on, because I used to be the worst at this. Fantasy fights are bad, okay? By a fantasy fight, I mean you're arguing with your spouse on the way to work. You're arguing with your spouse while you're taking a shower. All you're doing is expressing what you're frustrated at. You're not learning anything. It doesn't help anything. It goes directly against Philippians 4:8. If I'm thinking about my wife, it better be something on this list. Now, of course, there are times with your spouse, with a counselor or something, you're addressing the things that are frustrating that might not be on that list. But to have a cherishing marriage, you have to win the mind games. Too often in marriage, we don't give our spouse the benefit of the doubt. We give them the certainty of our condemnation. And that doesn't lead to a cherishing marriage. The fourth thing is cherishing words. This is so helpful for me to use cherishing words. Literally every conversation makes my wife feel cherished or diminished or judged or ignored. And so it was helpful for me to say, at the end of this conversation, I want Lisa to feel more cherished. And so I have to think about how we talk and how I use words. We usually fly on United. I've got about 2 million miles on United. That's not like metaphoric. I mean, that's legitimate. They tell you how many miles you've flown. So we usually get treated well, but we had to change our flight at the last minute. So we were both in middle seats, and we couldn't be seated together. And we were delayed. So we were thrilled to get in as walk-ons, but that meant we just had to grab something on the way. We were both really hungry. And so I'm just trying to grab something because I'm just hungry. So I got a yogurt parfait, which I think is okay. And Lisa's like, do you know how much sugar is in those things? When she says sugar, that's not a good thing, all right? Sugar is demonic in her mind. And then I got a bag of what I would call dried fruit. She would call chocolate-covered raisins. In my defense, it was dark chocolate raisins, which I think, I'm just hungry. I just want to get something there. And she's just like, oh, this is my husband, right? And so we sit down, and I'm across the row in the middle, and then I see the guy that sits next to her. It's like, it could be Lisa's ideal man. He's a doctor. You can tell he's bringing up these medical things. And then he puts out his lunch. And it's like, first, he's got a green smoothie, all right? His wife isn't with him, and he's drinking a green smoothie. He's got a bottle of seltzer water, a quinoa and black bean salad, and a bag of carrots for dessert. I'm like, this is Satan in action, all right? How do I tempt Lisa, this smart guy, probably makes a good income, eats just like she wants a guy to eat. I'm like, oh, this is just terrible. And then the flight ends, and he gets up, and here's where the angels came back. Because he got on his phone, and Lisa heard him talking to his wife. It's really clipped tones. It was just like, yeah, look, okay, I'm still on the phone, whatever, we'll just have to get it. And then she could tell when the sun got on. Hi, Alex, how are you? But oh, that's so great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. All right, put your mom back on. Look, we said we would do it. I just want you to get it done, okay? Bye. Now, Lisa will happily go home with a guy who has a yogurt parfait and dried fruits for a quick lunch over a man who knows more about the human body than I'll ever forget, but who talks to his wife like that. He might know a lot about science. He doesn't understand relationships, how damaging one conversation like that could be. Proverbs 18:21 says this, the tongue has the power of life and death. Look at it that way. You are breathing life or inviting death into your relationship with your tongue. And guys, let me be strong with you this time. Colossians 3:19. I've got a whole sermon on this. I love this sermon. Love your wives and never treat them harshly. Love is present tense in the Greek. Continually keep on loving your wives. Never stop. Do not treat them harshly as in the aorist tense even once. It literally means to make your wife's life bitter. And Paul is saying, always love, not once do you get to make your wife feel bitter. Not because you have a sore back, not because you weren't treated fairly by your boss, not because you didn't break 90 in golf or whatever it was, not once. Verbal abuse should be unthinkable in a Christian home. If we want our wife to feel cherished, it'll never happen if we don't gain control of our tongue. It should be affirming and encouraging and adoring, never harsh, never assaulting. And here's the thing, you got to learn how to use cherishing words, and you may have to ask your spouse to help you. This happened when Lisa and I first became empty nesters. She now travels with me almost all the time, which I love. But when we first started traveling together, it amazed me because she's the extrovert, I'm the introvert. She's making new best friends everywhere she goes. And so she's telling me everybody's life story, right, on our way. But she would never pay attention to where the hotel room is. And she'd never pay attention to parking. And it was amazing because I let her go out of the elevator first, and you'd think half the time she would accidentally go the right way. It's like repelling magnets. It was like 9 times out of 10, she goes, even if we'd been at a place for a long time. And I was just amazed at this because she just doesn't pay attention because she knows I do. In fact, one time, I'm going to show. She approved it, but she just called me. This was like 3 months ago. She goes, okay, now don't put this in a talk, knowing I probably would. I don't remember what floor we're on, right? She'd been working on it. So one time she goes, we'd been there a couple nights, and I let her out of the elevator. She goes right, our room is left. I'm like, seriously? Yeah, didn't make her feel cherished. Might shock you, but okay, that's not going to work. So the next time she does it again, and she's talking to me, and I just stopped where I was. She's walking and talking, and then notices I'm not with her. Also a fail, guys. Don't do that, all right? That didn't make her feel cherished. And so I just tried to be, as a guy, well, honey, look, if I say something, it makes you angry. If I don't say anything, it makes you frustrated. Obviously, the problem's not with me. And Lisa says, Gary, it's so easy. It's so easy. When that happens, just say, this way, hon, with exactly that tone. This way, hon. And we'll both be so happy, right? I got to apply it the very next trip, right? She goes the wrong way. I say, this way, hon. She turns and she gives me a gorgeous smile. And that happens on about 80% of our trips now. But it's part of our story. We laugh about it. It draws us together. It once caused tension, and now it brings unity. So what do I mean by this? You might have a different situation, but wives, if your husbands feel disrespected, put it back on them. Okay, I don't want you to feel disrespected, but I also don't want you to drive our family off a cliff, all right? So when this is happening, how do I communicate to you in a way that doesn't make you, just tell me, what am I supposed to say? Guys, ask your wife, help me in this situation. I want to use cherishing words. I don't know how to, that's the wonderful thing about marriage. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a PhD guy. Just help me. I want to cherish you. If this doesn't cherish you, help me to find a way to do that. Matthew 12, 36 through 37 says this, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for, what's that next word? Every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. What if we apply that to our marriage? I'm married to God's daughter. You know how God feels about his daughters, men? Women, you're married to God's sons. You know how God feels about his sons? I give my life for my son or my daughter. I don't want there to be one careless word that God's going to say, how can you talk to my son or daughter that way? So we catch bids. We win the mind games. We protect our spouse. We use cherishing words. What I want to end with on our time here is the biblical power to keep on cherishing. I think this is so key. I think this is a gospel message. This is why I love being a Christian. Because I know it's supernatural to cherish someone who's not always cherishable. You can decide, I want to do this, and then they break your heart, or they frustrate you, or they anger you. It's going to be hard to do that. What is the biblical power to keep on cherishing an imperfect person? And this is really it. Those who cherish their spouse meditate often on the kindness and mercy of God. They find the power to cherish an imperfect spouse by meditating often on the perfect God who cherishes the imperfect them. And they have so much gratitude and know what it's like to receive mercy, they're able to give it on. Those who aren't able to cherish their spouse meditate often on how their spouse messes up, what their spouse isn't, what their spouse does that bothers them, and then they're never able to keep cherishing their spouse. So it goes back to our Creator. I mean, I think the only reason any of us are here is because one person decided to make you, and that's God. He is responsible for the fact that you live. He and He alone. And then He chose to make you a human. He could have made you a squirrel. Right? How pathetic would that be, right? You run around, oh yeah, I found a nut, great. So you run out in the street, you get hit by a car. You become dinner for the crows until you're just flattened and I run by you on the road and try to look away. I mean, no, He created you to be a human. So we get to know laughter. We're the only creatures who laugh because we're the only creatures created in the image of God. We get to know beauty and music. We get to be parents. Some of us get to be grandparents, which is as good as they say it is. I mean, all of those things. And then as those of us who are Christians, we have the presence of the Holy Spirit. I would have wrecked my life 1,000,000 times over if God hadn't sent me a Spirit who would convict me and counsel me and instruct me. And then I know that I don't have to work for my salvation. That's in the finished work of Jesus Christ. It's already done. I can rest in God's affirmation. I mean, all that God has given me is so overwhelming. And then He says, okay, and so will you love my daughter out of reverence for me? man, now my wife is a delight to love, but even as she was difficult, I'm like, man, out of gratitude, how could I say no? And so it's the message of the gospel, receiving it from God, that allows me to give that cherishing to my wife. The perfect God who cherishes the imperfect me, empowers me, and models to me how I cherish my imperfect spouse. Julie had to learn this the hard way. She was raised by a very demanding dad. He came out of the military, literally did the quarter on the bed trick. If she got 4 A's and an A minus, he'd say, what happened here? And if she got straight A's one quarter, he'd expect it the next one. He was very demanding, but Julie was so competent, she kind of kept excelling. And she goes to college, and she meets this guy named Jeff, who seems like he's the exact opposite of her dad. He thinks it's cute when she spills something on her blouse instead of a shame. He affirms her. He accepts her like she's never been accepted before. She falls in love. She's happy to marry him. And then about a year into their marriage, she tries to turn him into her dad. Guys, you say, I've seen this so many times because a happy-go-lucky guy isn't that ambitious. And Julie started to figure out, we live in the smallest house. We can't go on vacation. Our cars are old. And so she's trying to get Jeff to be a little bit more. Have you ever thought of going back to school? I hated school. I couldn't wait. Why would I go back to school? Well, if you go back to school, you could become the boss. I said, Julie, everybody hates the boss. They gossip about the boss. Why do I want to go back to school that I hate so that I can have my friends gossip about me behind my back? And she realized, well, that's just who he is. They had 3 kids, 2 daughters who were just like Julie. One may be president of the United States. One may be president of Ford Motors, for all I know. But then they had their first son, Brent, and he was a mini-me of Jeff. He looked like Jeff. He talked like Jeff. He had the attitude of Jeff. But Julie says, no, he's going to be more ambitious than Jeff. He's going to be different. And they were just butting heads his whole first 10 years of life. Julie had a great, godly friend. This is why I'm glad that those of you who are in small groups, you need people like this that love you and will speak up. And she asked Julie out because Julie kept sharing prayer requests with how it was hard with her and Brent, her son. And she said to Julie, I don't think you realize how many wives in this church envy you. What are you talking about? We have the smallest house. We've never left the country for a vacation. We drive the oldest cars. Everybody knows Jeff adores you. He will do whatever you ask. He serves you. I got to tell you, we have a lot of friends with really big houses that feel really empty, and they would leave them for a second to move into a 1,200 square foot home. Still costs over $1 million on the waterfront here, we found out. So I'm blowing the story. So if they could have a husband that would be connected to them and do for them what Jeff will do for you. And she's blown away. And then she goes, Julie, your daughters are amazing. They may run the world, but I'm not sure the world is big enough for 3 kids like that. She goes, Brent is a little Jeff, and the world needs more Jeffs. There's a place for ambitious people. But Brent's going to be like Jeff. He's going to be relational. He's going to let him be a Jeff. And she goes, and I don't want to offend you, although it did offend her, but I'm just wondering if you've ever really understood the gospel. Now, Julie really was offended. She's been a Christian her whole life. How dare you say that? That's a new word for you if you're not from the church. This isn't a full description of the gospel, but here's sort of what I'm saying that the part of the gospel is. It means, first, how much we've been forgiven. Not that we've messed up a little, but we have messed up a lot. We're so indebted to God. My natural bent is to resist God, to exalt myself instead of Him, to not be kind to people. And when I remember what I've been forgiven, and then what I've been saved from, that I deserve hell right now. God doesn't have to wait until I die to weigh up my acts. I've already earned it. As bad as any day may be, it's better than I deserve because, in fact, I deserve hell. And it's only God's kindness and mercy that says, no, you don't have to go there. And then the cost that Christ paid to win that salvation. He didn't just snap his fingers. He took the weight of the world's sin on his shoulders and bore that so that I could be at peace with God. We talk about wanting to share the gospel with unbelievers. I'm saying share it with yourself every day. Because when I wake up and I remind myself what God has forgiven me of, the price that he paid to win that, and what I really deserve, I'm just so much more able to give that graciousness to others. When I forget what God has done for me, I want others to do everything right, and I become more demanding. Julie had this conversation. She was not happy with her friend. But sometimes you know how the Spirit piles message on message. So her church had through the footsteps of Jesus right before Easter. It was Good Friday week. They had the Stations of the Cross. And she got up to the last one, and this church used Jesus' words from the book of John, the last words he uttered according to the Gospel of John. It is finished. And that word finished hit her like a 2x4. She realized because of her dad, she always thought it wasn't enough. If she got straight A's in the fall, she better get straight A's in the winter. If she did this, she had to do that. It was never finished with her dad. And so she realized she had brought that attitude into her family. It was never finished with her daughters. It was never finished with Jeff. He'd never earned enough. He didn't do enough. And then she thought of little Brent. He's never felt like it was finished. He's never felt like he's earned my love. And so when she received that from God, it's finished. God accepts me as I am, all my mistakes there. And then she said, Lord, help me to show this to my family. So a couple weeks after Easter, Jeff had spent all weekend putting in this rock garden that she just really wanted and she loved. He had to do it. They couldn't afford to have someone. And so when he walked in, she handed him a certificate for a professional massage at a local salon. And Jeff couldn't believe it because she'd always had sort of this passive-aggressive, we don't earn enough money for this, you can't have that luxury, we can't afford that. And for her to present him with something that was pure luxury, saying, you've worked so hard, I know you're sore, I want to do this. She said it was the first time in her life she could look at his face and realize, it's finished. I love you. I appreciate you. I cherish you. And she felt sad for all the years that she had wasted. 1 John 4:19 says, we love. Why? Because he first loved us. I'm asking you, when I talk about cherishing, man, that's tough. I don't think you can do this on your own. This is one of a million reasons to become a Christian. And if you're here and you want to do this, it's where it starts. Talk to one of the pastors. How do I get to know Jesus? This isn't just about trying harder. It's being reminded of the gospel every day so that we can live it out for others. Let me end our entire time with the story of a man who told me I didn't realize how right I was. It's a surprising conversation. I was in Winnipeg one February, which I don't recommend any of you do. Even in Canada, they call it Winterpeg. I mean, it is a cold that just takes hold. I know you can get cold here, but not, I mean, it just, you feel like you're going to get frostbite walking from your car into the hotel. Where this guy who lives there is at a big convention center, and then he's driving me back to my hotel. He said, Gary, I just got to tell you, you don't have any clue how right you are. And he told me the story of his two marriages. His first marriage was a very traditional marriage. He loved his wife. They had traditional roles. He didn't have any real complaints. It's just what you do. After about 16 years of being married, she started to get really sick. And then it became terminal. So for the last 8 months of her life, he did everything. He had to do the cooking and the cleaning and the shopping. He dressed her. Because when you love someone and they're dying, that's what you do. He was single for 4 years. And he said, when you're a single man, you got to do everything for yourself because there's no one else to do it. And then he fell in love with another woman. She had never been married. And they started to date, and her friends warned her, look, your life's pretty good. Are you sure you want to get married? She goes, well, he's so kind. They go, well, guys always say that before they get married, and then they become so demanding. And she says, I want to give it a try. So she married him. And Terry told me, Gary, I resolved I wanted to treat my second wife like I did my first wife the last 8 months of our marriage. I'd been single for 4 years, so I'm going to keep doing everything I did, saying my own laundry, my own dishes, and whatnot. And I'm going to start calling her princess to remind myself she is a princess, and I want to treat her that way. And this woman felt like she had died and gone to heaven. And she was angry. What are you talking about? This is so great. And they were waiting for it to change, but it didn't. Until very sadly, about 15 years in, she also became sick and ultimately died. So he's looking back on these 2 marriages. And he said, Gary, my second marriage was so much richer and more fulfilling and even happier than my first marriage. Not because my second wife was a better woman than my first wife. She wasn't. They were about the same. I've been married to each of them for 15 years. As far as their kindness, their spiritual maturity, the pleasantness of their personality, they were about the same. The difference is that he loved his first wife, but he loved and cherished his second wife. Now, why do I end with this? I'm trying to expose one of Satan's lies that wants to steal this whole day from you. Some of you are hearing this and saying, this sounds like such a great thing in marriage. If only I was married to someone else. To have a cherishing marriage, I'd have to change my spouse. And Terry would tell you, you don't need to change your spouse. Change your attitude. Change the bar from love to love and cherish. She goes, it's about the same woman. I got a chance to apply this in 2 different marriages that were pretty much the same marriage, and one was immensely different just because of the power of cherishing my spouse. Now, I believe if you'll apply the gospel, you can do that. It begins with the mind. Your spouse is Adam or Eve, the only man or woman in the world. You wake up, how do I showcase my spouse? How do I bring out the perfection of their beauty? You even use a sexual relationship to show them as desirable and worthy of your affection and your attention. And then you start to say, I want to catch their bids. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to win the mind games. I'm going to use cherishing words. Every time we talk, I want them to come out feeling cherished. And for me to be able to keep doing that, I've got to preach the gospel to myself every day, or I will run out of the ability to do that. But I believe God can make this happen in your marriage. And I want to pray a prayer over you that he would do just that. If you'll bow your heads with me. Father, I just pray that you would shut Satan up right now. That he could not steal this from any couple here. Lord, I know unbelief can build up and calcify with years of lies and disappointment and frustration, but the power of your Spirit is more than capable of breaking through. And I just pray, first, that there would be hope. And Lord, I know it may not happen today, but this is a church. It's a real life. They have people, they have advocates, they will walk with these couples. Issues need to be talked about. There needs to be healing. There needs to be confession. But Lord, I pray that they could at least hope that a cherishing marriage is possible. And for others, Lord, they came here and they had a pretty good marriage. And they think they've done fine because they've loved their spouse. And you are gently saying to them, raise the bar. It's wonderful to love your spouse. But I want you to love and cherish each other. Lord, we want to do that to give a great inspiration to those who are here in Idaho, that the younger people of this church would see that a Christian marriage isn't just about staying married, but being married in an entirely different way. Let us show the power of the gospel by the way we cherish our spouse as you cherish us. Bless them, Lord. Be with them. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all for hanging with me. Good night, 4 hours. Appreciate it so much. Thank you.